Hello all, and welcome to our panel. הפאנל הזה יהיה באנגלית. This panel is indeed in English, and with our distinguished guests today, we have Vince Doherty over there. On my left, I'm not sure whether it is on your screen, but I'm guessing right because it always goes that way. Vince has been kind of a mentor to everybody, really, in the Worldcon community. I think James can probably say more on that. And he also is the stupidest man alive, even if I appreciate him above all other people when it comes to management and leadership, because he's actually agreed to chair Worldcon twice. And I believe the consensus will be that he's out of his mind. Then we have Deb Geisler. I think she's my first friend in global fandom. And well, we met earlier online. I think the first time we met and I talked to her endlessly was at SMUFCon 2007. And of course, she's also a Worldcon chair, but her claim is she's done her thing for King and Country and doesn't need to do it anymore because she was a chair. And we have James Bacon. James has been my boss in Dublin 2019, and he consistently kept telling me, Gadi, you're more cheeky than other Israelis I've met, and putting me in my place. So he has actually managed to manage me, which usually doesn't happen. And indeed, he was the chair for Dublin 2019, and is one of the people I certainly look to for advice on anything fandom. So with that, I'll turn to you guys. Maybe you want to say something just for the introduction, or you're okay with whatever I said. Vince, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to join you all. I would very much like to be there in person, of course. So maybe in some future date. Thanks for the introduction, and let me just qualify. I'm not the only person, nor even the only living person, to chair or co-chair Worldcon twice, but I have certainly got no ambitions to do it a third time. I'm perfectly happy to be the great eminence along with many others.
Did you guys just hear that? Vince just admitted to wanting to do a third time.
No, I think I said the opposite. I'm usually very clear about these things. And I'm sure we can speak more about our journeys to the to get there, which were no doubt very different. But very happy to let Deb and James say a few more words about themselves as well.
This is an interesting panel because it is a panel from how many countries are we in? 1, 2, 3, at least 4, right? 4 or 5, and so many time zones. And that, of course, is one of the best parts about Worldcon, is that it is so widespread and far-flung. And it's been a delight to get to know people from all over the world, including the 2 gentlemen who are on this panel and Gadi. And so thank you very much.
James?
Yeah, no, they're all good introductions. I don't have anything to add at the moment. I would crack on now, Gadi,
All right, then. Well, we did prepare a list of questions, but I'm happy to throw these away. Let's just start with the first one to get the panel rolling, if that's good with you. And I guess the first one I would ask would be, what is Worldcon? Why is it fun and why is it crazy? Any takers?
Sure. Worldcon is the same as your local convention, a science fiction convention. A gathering of fans who want to celebrate and have a good time, have talks, panels, discussions, a few drinks in the bar, and make friends, meet friends, go out for a meal. And the only difference is that you get the opportunity to bring it to somewhere different every year. And that's quite impressive. Most local communities or countries have conventions. They don't move. No one can turn up and say, I'm going to take that convention and I'm going to run it in a different country, in a different continent. That's quite powerful. And it has a history, which is quite nice, going back to 1939. And it's got the Hugo Awards, which are some nice, prestigious awards. So not only do you get to steal a convention, you get a sort of a history with it, and you get some really cool awards to give away. So it's actually quite nice. And that means that it brings in different fans quite a lot, although there is some continuity.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even in the name, although World Science Fiction Convention, shortened to Worldcon, implies that, it was set up always as an international event. In fact, the very first was named after what was then the World's Fair, basically in a sort of, you know, the traveling international events, which happened to be in New York that year. But of course, it has become very much an international event, much like the World's Fairs and the Olympics, and you know, mostly for good. You know, you get that amazing diversity of people who turn up, you know, from different geographies, different ages, very good mixture of professionals and fans. You know, it has a lot of very professional content while being primarily about, you know, the fan experience. And certainly nowadays, you know, a huge diversity of content, you know, like as James said, your local event, but just on steroids. I mean, the recent Worldcons have, you know, typically have, you know, 800 plus panels and over 5 days, and, you know, big events, including the Hugos and Masquerade and other big events. And, you know, it's just a huge range of things, and also unusual in being still an all volunteer event, which is a key part of its culture. And I'm sure we'll touch more on that. But it's just, you know, especially if it's the first time that you go to a Worldcon, it can be a pretty overwhelming experience, even if you do recognize from your local event, you know, the individual components of it.
It's been referred to as the Fanish family reunion. And I like that because there's a sense of bonding that you often do with Worldcon, with your local conventions too. But Worldcon lets you bond to people much farther away. And that's the cool part. So.
Thank you. Well, we are kind of settling into a performative Zoom session where we are actually constructive and very much jovially respectful of each other's time. I don't like that. So before we move on from that and we start cutting each other off and having more fun, I will say you guys are awesome. And to the people at home or at work or wherever you're from, below the screen, you can actually ask questions. So look down for a second and see where it is, and you're able to engage with us directly. Please ask us questions or tell us how beautiful we are. So let's go somewhere a little bit weird. Why would anybody take this on? What does it take? What's your weird story of getting into Worldcon? And I think I would like to start with James.
I think for me, it was the challenge of bringing the Worldcon to my home country, Ireland, where they had never been a Worldcon before. And like many countries, we have a science fiction community, and we have conventions, and we're involved and engaged with other conventions, either in Britain, Europe, or the world. And I went to my first Worldcon, which Vincent ran in 1995, and I thought it was pretty phenomenal. But I walked away from that convention saying an event that size would never, ever happen in Ireland. And then I went to Deb's Worldcon, which was actually my second Worldcon in 2004. And I said that, you know, this is an amazing event. This convention could never happen in Ireland. And then in Ireland, they built a convention center that could hold a Worldcon in 2008, 9, and 10. And I went to it when it opened, and I walked in with a piece of paper in my hand and walked around the place without permission. I was so keen to see it. I was so keen to see whether it was feasible as a venue. And yeah, like from that point then, it's just like, yeah, wow, we have this really important part, which is a building, a venue. We can do a Worldcon. And that's quite powerful. The idea of then bringing this convention, which has been in Germany, Japan, America, Canada, Britain, and bringing it to Dublin, Ireland, where it's never been. At that stage, it hadn't been in Finland yet. You know, it was powerful. You know, it's quite attractive, because actually it's, you know, there are people, you know, you can be at home at Octocon or a National Science Fiction Convention with 200 people, and those 200 people feel to be very similar to the 6,000 people who were at the Worldcon. So there are people. There definitely are people. And you recognize that. I think that was just being able to bring those people to Dublin was phenomenal. And then all the things you get to do with it too. You get the guests of honor, and you get the featured artists, and you get the art show, and you get all the different aspects of a Worldcon. And you can feature things which nobody would feature because you're looking
I
at your
actually
country.
think that the Israeli fans don't necessarily understand what these things mean.
Oh,
Because while we understand the words art and show, we don't have that, for example, in Israel. Would you mind saying, anybody, would you mind saying a little bit more about these different parts of Worldcon?
Well, an art show is it's like a museum for really cool art that we like, that we can also buy. So you go into the art show, and artists who do cover art for books and art in so many other places, who are part of our community, have chosen to exhibit their artwork and ask for it to be critiqued and then bought. And the cool thing is that I'm staring actually at a piece on my wall that was the cover art for Robert Heinlein's Double Star. And I got to buy the piece of artwork that cover was designed from. And it was the cover that I knew when I was in my teen years. So that's pretty cool. And I've gotten to meet some of the artists, and that's almost as, I love artists. I think they're great. They're flaky, but they're great. So
I think that, Vincent, your big thing is music, right?
No, and art as well. I mean, I'm also facing a wall of original art, including some covers, and of course I've got the one behind me, which was by Chris Foss, which we commissioned for the cover of the London Worldcon souvenir book. In addition to what Deb said, we also, and I think a key feature of it, and of local conventions, but Worldcon in particular, is it's that combination of fan and professional, and the art shows usually also include a number of people who are, shall we say, aspiring professionals, and then varying degrees of amateur. And it can be really lovely to see how people develop, to get the chance to buy early works. I mean, a number of people who are now very famous professionals started by displaying their early art to their friends and hoping they would sell a few pieces. And yes, and some quite famous names actually, and you continue to see that as well. So the art show is that mixture of amateur and professional and a whole spectrum across that. And you can see some really, really fine stuff. And also, the artists will be around and you can have a conversation with them as well. And that can be as much fun as the art as well. And yeah, there is a musical element as well to the conventions, but that may be a separate topic.
So, by the way, I keep awkwardly quiet for a second or two to see if any of you would actually like to step in. But you're also you're just nice. I don't like it. James, you actually started making a lot of waves with the children programming. You created something that was never seen before.
Sort of, not really. We used to run convention. Myself and my pals didn't really go to college. We didn't go to university, and we probably missed that wild time because we were all in employment. And we decided when we were in our 20s, we decided that we wanted to run. We went, and as a teenager and in my early 20s, I went to really fun conventions, which were very loosely based on science fiction and much more based on having a good time running around using super soakers or pretending to be live action froggers and things like that. So it was all good fun. And I realized that they were really conventions I enjoyed, and myself and my pals decided we'd run some of those, so we did. And then we were running these conventions, and there would be everything from tattooing, live piercing, talks from chess experts, taxidermists. It was very crazy. We'd find a theme and we'd go with the theme. And there was some science fiction. And then Vincent thought that this would be good somehow as part of, could they do this for children? Could the crazy people in British fandom, because I was doing these events mostly in Britain, some in Ireland, could they do these things and entertain children? And of course the answer is yes, because what we were doing we were doing stuff that children would love, but we knew adults would really love too. And therefore it was more, we were doing stuff for kids, but with adults, and adults love that, like gaming, all that stuff is fun. We all love doing fun stuff. So I actually went to Deb's convention where they had two people, Persis Thorndike and Inger Myers, and they were doing the children's program in 2004. It was really quite dynamic and much, much better than anything I'd ever seen anywhere over here in Europe. And I just took a lot of what they did and then mixed it with our crazy ideas and then ran a children's program in 2005. And it was just good fun. Like we had, you know, George R. R. Martin turn up and tell teenagers why they should get involved in fandom. We had Ian Banks come in and read a piece of, I think it was Terry Pratchett, you know, because we couldn't get Terry Pratchett, but we could get Ian Banks. But then we also had kids running around with liquid nitrogen. We had them on roller skates. And we had lots of, we had slot cars going on, lots of fun stuff. And I really enjoyed it a lot. And again, it was still a little bit, wasn't actually thinking that I would run a Worldcon in Ireland at that stage. At the end of that one, I was thinking that I would be involved with the next British Worldcon.
So we actually have a question.
Oh dear.
What is the, I mean, I don't know how you would be able to choose. If I was asked this, I would completely blank out. But what is your craziest Worldcon story?
Oh, well, I'm sure we have stories that we can actually tell in public and those that we can't. And there's crazy funny and there's crazy serious as well. Crazy serious was the first time you chair Worldcon and a very famous author dies on the first day of the convention. But I don't want to say much more about that. Crazy fun. I mean, referring to what James was talking about. I mean, he was first of all understating the fun and the entertainment value of all the stuff that he did. How shall I say, gleefully uninhibited by health and safety rules. And including bringing, people such as myself in as the emergency replacement mad scientist, given that I have a chemistry background, because the person that he had arranged to go into the car park and blow lots of things up using chemistry experiments as entertainment, I got drafted literally at the last minute to do that instead. Having been out of chemistry for 10 years, and I did succeed in blowing a couple of things up, fortunately not including any people, but it was a close thing. It's there are stories like that, but I'm not sure if you were looking for a particular angle on.
I'm just trying to show our fans in Israel that fans are crazy wherever you are.
Yeah. So in 1989.
Oh, come on, Deb. You know that your craziest story is you volunteering for me to run the dunk tank in 2021.
No, I didn't volunteer. You tried to volunteer me.
Can't hear you. Lost your audio.
Can you hear me now?
Barely.
Okay. Sorry.
There you are.
You get what you get. There you are.
There you are. So as my volunteer in 2021, the dunk tank must be your craziest story of decades in fandom.
No, because I didn't volunteer. You volunteered me. There's a difference. There was when the World Science Fiction Convention was, when Worldcon was in Baltimore. No, not Baltimore. Yes, Baltimore. Philadelphia. My apologies. No, it was Baltimore. And we were actually competing with the folks from Philadelphia for the 2001 Worldcon, and we lost that bid. But as part of the bid, we were actually bidding the city of Orlando, Florida. And if you're bidding for the city of Orlando, Florida, you need a mascot. And several people had suggested that we use the orange. And I'm like, well, that's great. That'll sit on the table and not do anything. So we need something that's a little bit more vivid, a little bit more fun, a little bit more interactive. And we opted for the pink flamingo. That was a potentially a strategic error. And it probably damaged a number of businesses permanently because they saw their sales of pink flamingo merchandise going through the roof for 1998 and then suddenly tanking again, and they couldn't figure out why. But we had flamingos everywhere, pink flamingos everywhere. And among other things, for those parties at the Worldcon, we had built these giant flamingos out of pepper mache and all sorts of things. And so they were roughly 2.5, 3 meters tall and about 2 meters wide, and they were just amazing. So at the end, when we lost our bid, we had to get rid of these things. And we had 3 of these giant flamingos. And I had somebody come up to me and they said, so Deb, what are we doing with the flamingos? And I said, what do you mean? Because we were giving away every flamingo we had. And we had flamingo lights and we had hats and any kind of merchandise you can think of. We had some of that in our party. And they said, what about the giant flamingos? And I said, oh, somebody want them? And they said, yes. And so the last I saw were these two men carrying this flamingo, giggling hysterically, and I must admit, somewhat drunkenly, while they trotted out into the streets of Baltimore, never to be seen again, at least by me, with their wives running behind them going, you are not taking that home with you. So I was responsible for possibly 2 divorces and definitely at least a couple of car accidents that night.
Yeah, so I think there's an awful lot of social activity at a Worldcon, and I really enjoy that aspect. So the Worldcon, in the evening time, it depends on the convention. They have things that they call parties. And sometimes you're in hotel rooms and sometimes you're in convention space. And basically it's where other people who want you to come to their convention give you free booze. 1995, I experienced this for the first time ever. And I was very unsure what the hell was going on, because we were in this queue and we weren't really sure whether we were getting a beer for free or not, but it looked like there was free beer because we couldn't see cash passing hands. Myself and my best friend were there. And there's these group of people and they were giving away this beer from Boston, and they were saying that they had this Boston beer. And my friend Mick was a very astute man, and he turned around and said to the guy, I see you've got some spirits behind your table. After ascertaining, I should say, that this booze was free, which is, I'm like, free? Nobody gives away free booze. Like, this was not unheard of in Ireland. You just don't do that. So, you know, Mick ascertained that this booze was free, and the guy turned around and said, it is. He said, you've got some spirits there. And the guy said, oh, yes. Would you like some spirits? There's lots of it here. And of course, Mick, you know, he says, oh, I'd love a Southern Comfort, please. You know, so he gets a highball glass, and there's a half glass nearly of Southern Comfort. And Mick says, I'd like one for my wife. And his wife was just down there, and his wife waved down, and he went, oh, great for your wife. No problem. He says, what would you like, sir? And I says, I'll have the same there now, you know. And I got a grand glass. And then he says, and I says, and one for my wife as well. And he gave me another one. I had no wife at all. But the thing was that, you know, that continued all weekend, and there was a lot of drinking, and the guys from Baltimore were really good to us and gave us booze at maybe 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning that we could then sit in a bar, and the booze had its corkage paid for. We could sit in a bar with these big sort of jugs of free drink and drink until daylight. And that was really awesome. And I think that's, the social scene is really nice. Like, it depends, you're always having good times, falling over, dancing at discos, having a good, you know, trying to keep yourself under control. And generally, you know, that sort of stuff is really good. But, you know, it's also strange because you walk out of, say, Melbourne Convention Centre in Australia, and, you know, you've just had a feed of drinks and everything else. And there's a bus sort of stop area, and it's nighttime and it's just a bit chilly. And, you know, you look at it and it could be Dublin. And you're like, no, it's not. This is actually Australia. And that really is where, you know, you're having a great time with people in a bar. That bar could be anywhere, you know, and I love that. That's what I really like, you know.
Would you mind explaining to the audience what Worldcon parties are?
It sort of depends what convention you're at. And like at Dublin, the parties were basically where you queued to get into a room with too many people, get forced to drink, and then drink it, and then hear some wonderful stuff, and then go into another room where there were too many people and get another drink, and so on. The parties, it depends on what convention you're at, but the parties are promoting future Worldcons. So when we were a bid, and then we were an actual convention, to promote our Worldcon, we went to other countries, other Worldcons, and other countries, full stop. And we would turn up and we would present some Irish hospitality, which would normally be booze. Like, you know, you'd sort of be hard pressed to say, would you like a cup of tea? And yeah, people would enjoy that. And yeah, you get to see a lot of people. At conventions in America, they have arrangements where your hotel rooms are huge. They're like, you know, maybe 5 times the size of my apartment. And you can just have lots of people in there. And you can, again, we would serve drink, and it's very sociable. At the same time, people walk out at midnight, go downstairs to the convention, and there'll be a discussion on at midnight, or there'll be a music item, or there'll be room with people playing folk type music, filk, and then somewhere else there'll be like a play or a video about to start. So it's not as if this is in isolation. There's so much going on at the same time in a Worldcon. At any one time, you might have to choose up to 25 activities from.
I see that Deb unmuted.
Not just so that I would remember to unmute. Pay no attention.
Well, one thing I believe every Israeli who is a fan would know is the Hugo Award, or the Hugo Awards, because we buy the books when they're translated and we see, you know, nominee, won, whatever it is, the Hugo Awards. What's the relation? How does that run between the Hugo Awards and Worldcon? I think I'll ask Vince for this one.
So the Hugo Awards are the gift of the members, the participants of the World Science Fiction Convention. Although in recent years you could say that their visibility has been such they can be a bit of the tail that wags the dog, if you know that figure of speech. But nevertheless, what started, I think, in the early 50s as the Science Fiction Achievement Awards, which were given by the Worldcon, in fact, initially by the Worldcon organizing committee rather than the membership of the event. But very quickly it evolved into a set of awards on a number of categories for, achievement in a particular year, as nominated for by the attendees of the Worldcon, which back in the 50s would have been a few hundred people. So it was a mix of pros and fans, but a very highly informed group. Nowadays, you get attendance at Worldcon in the many thousands, and quite often the participation in the Hugo is also in the many thousands, or at least the several thousands. And again, it retains that mix of fan and pro involvement, but shall we say, very highly informed. It's not like just a general open People's Choice Award where anybody anywhere can just say, oh, this is my favorite. It is a very well informed group, shall we say. It has become a very big thing. You can see one of the trophies here. Actually, it might be a bit small on the screen. That's a copy of the Hugo that was given in Dublin, in fact, where I was part of the organizing team for the Hugos. But I think it's great because many of us are involved in running and participating the events. It's a hobby, of course, but we do it for the love of it. Primarily, I'm doing it as a science fiction fan. And the opportunity to not only be able to run such a large event, but also to see all sort of friends, other fans, and professionals, and also to give something back in terms of a kind of thank you or pat on the back, I think is a really, really important thing. And having the ability to give that gift is a very important part of being a participant in the Worldcon. Certainly when I talk to people who, maybe even for the first time, they as you said, when you see books and other works which have been nominated for or won a Hugo, and you use that as a symbol of or an identifier of quality, to then actually be able to participate in that is actually a big deal. And I remember the first few times I participated in it, I thought it was a really big deal. And since then, I've tried very hard to always to nominate and to vote as well as I can.
All right, so we have some questions from the audience, and let's make it sort of a lightning round and see how fast I can stress you out. So let's start with the question of how big is Worldcon? How many people go to Worldcon?
5,500 people went to Dublin. We had over 6,500 people members. The Worldcon can vary in size up and down. I think, where would we be in a smaller one, Vincent?
Australia would have been
Australia,
like 20,
about 2,000, maybe 2,500 at Australia, I would guess. So it depends where your convention is, but they've actually been getting a little bit bigger all along. They've sort of started to grow more in recent times.
Yeah, certainly the Worldcons in the middle of the last decade in London, and then let me think, Finland. They were 8,000 or so, and plus those who had joined, not as attending members, but to get the ability still to vote, for instance, what's called a supporting membership. I don't know if you have those at your local events. That took the
Actually,
numbers up to
we don't
10,
have memberships at all. People pay a ticket per event. So what is a membership?
Well, you get a ticket but you also become a member of the convention to the extent that you help to decide the Hugos. You help to decide where the convention is going to be the next time. So you might vote to put the convention in London or Boston or Tel Aviv, wherever it's going to go. You become part of the family. You get to make decisions about how the convention will run in the grander scheme of things. Because you go to the World Science Fiction Society business meeting, you're automatically a member of the World Science Fiction Society when you join the Worldcon. So it's not just a ticket, it's a convention membership. And if you pay for a membership, you get everything. That's it. We don't have ticket for this, ticket for that. You just pay for, it's a one price deal. It's sort of like the platinum membership at a Disney property. Only I think it's more fun and less mousy.
Worldcon is a Disney thing. I wonder what they would do. We would have Disney princesses like you, for example, right? No, okay. That joke completely failed. So there is
Worldcon predates Disney, and you have to remember what Disney based Disney on. He went to Chicago to see the railroad centenary fair, and he thought this was amazing, where there was acting and trains going across the stage. And then he went to see the Ford Museum. And then on the way back, he came up with Mouse World or Mouse Land or whatever, you know. So Worldcon was already running at this stage, and it's a different type of shape. But if you look at what Disney has done with like the likes of their cruises and everything else, they've got authors now in those cruises. Owen Colfer, who was at Worldcon in 2019, goes on those cruises and events regularly now because Disney recognized, well, they're clever. People like what, you know, conventions do.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd maybe add one thing as well, which is there's also a kind of like a cultural thing. I mean, the conventions, when they came together in the first several decades of them, they were, you know, they're primarily not commercial events, ticketed events. They are actually a group, a culture, and the idea of, you know, the idea of membership of, you know, everybody is part of it and everybody participates is actually remains one of the core sort of philosophical ideas as well that distinguishes it, let's say, from a gate show type event, which is primarily done for commercial purposes. You know, we still do this for love, not for money. And that's also why it's a membership and not a ticket.
So what would you guys suggest for a new member coming in for the first time to Worldcon, knowing nobody?
Volunteer. I mean, that's what really got me invested in the community. The first time I was ever at a Worldcon was NorEastCon 3 in 1989. And I'm sorry, 1989. I can't add anymore. In Boston, and it was phenomenal. And I'd volunteered. Actually, I'd volunteered one of my students. I teach at university. I had a student who was interested in learning about science fiction book publishing and public relations. And so I basically offered her to the convention as an intern. And they came up, one of the people from the convention came up, talked to me, and we made all the arrangements, and I thought that was that. And he said, so that's great. Now what do we have to do to get you? And there's something really phenomenal about someone saying that to you. You know, now that we've got your student, we really appreciate that and all that sort of stuff, but what do we have to do to get you? And so I volunteered, and I got sucked in, and it was wonderful, and I met cool people, and I got to see the back of the house. But there's a thing where if you work with people, it binds you together. And then when you work with people and you share some great interests in, it's even more like family. And I'd suggest it, even if you don't volunteer at a hugely involved way at the convention, at the meeting, it's a chance to meet people and to get some of those barriers dropped right away. It's great.
Would you like to add anything more to that, James, Vince?
I would say wear your fandom. Don't be afraid to show your fandom. You know, wear your shirt, wear your hat, wear your bag, wear your geeky mating call. Yeah, like if you've got a crocheted scarf like I have, and it's got some science fiction stuff on it, wear it. You know, show people what you're into and just, you know, engage. Like again, like unfortunately, like Deb, my first convention in 1991, I volunteered, and that was the end of it. You know, I walked into fandom in 1989, and they were really friendly people. But once you start helping with the convention, it's really it's sort of you meet people easier, and you don't always have to volunteer, obviously, but it's yeah.
No, we do also try to, with some organizational elements to be welcoming and inclusive as well. Events literally for, newcomers to the event, particularly if you've never been to a convention before and Worldcon is your first one, because it is very, very large and it can appear to be very impersonal as you walk in. So we try to be as welcoming as possible, and also have a number of, elements, panels or other sessions which are specifically tailored for people for whom it's the first time that they've been at such an event, and to give them a sense of both the content but also the feeling of the welcome. So but yeah, volunteering is a good way, and it can be a very slippery slope as well. I can certainly vouch for that. I went to my first convention at 16, the local one in Glasgow, and then within 2 years was volunteering, and then 2 years after that was chairing, and then 2 years after that attended my first Worldcon, and then 2 years after that started bidding to run my first Worldcon. So it can go very quickly as well.
All right. So knowing that Deb is leaving in 4 minutes or so, I would like to actually ask 2 questions directly for Deb, and then spread it out to both of you, if that's okay. And the first one is, I would exaggerate a little bit, or maybe not, but effectively being the leader of fandom for a couple of years when you take on that role, unfortunately for you. What do you do? How do you handle? How do you lead? What do you think or feel when things go wrong? How do you deal with that disappointment? How do you manage it?
I mean, it's always the case that you're going to face disappointments. Stuff won't go right. And I think fortunately, or unfortunately, both, I guess, I'd had some experience with dealing with the hard stuff, because before we won a bid to host a Worldcon, we lost one. And I was also the chair of that bid. So one of the things that teaches you is, if you're going to make yourself feel better about that, then you have to win the next time. But even if you win, then suddenly you have to put on a convention. And there's stuff that's going to happen. There are people who won't do what they said they will. And yet, when push comes to shove, it's down to you. So if you're the chair, it's all down to you. And, Harry Truman, the former US president, had a thing on his desk that said, "The buck stops here," meaning when something goes wrong, you're the one that has to answer for it. And so you just do what you have to do. And you recognize that if really cool things happen, you didn't do them. The people that work for you did them. But if real big screw ups happen, yeah, you're gonna take responsibility for those, and you should, because you get whatever glory there is. You also have to take the shot.
So I can already see James wanting to step in with his famous sentence about your job as a chair is to apologize, but we'll get to that in a minute. Deb, one more question. There have been people asking a lot about what would it take, what would need to change. Very honestly and realistically, how would we be able, or what would we need to do to be able to bring a Worldcon to Israel?
Oh, I don't know really. I don't know what your current situation is, to the extent that, there's physical space, there's the number of people who can work on it. There need to be enough people who have been to Worldcon, so that when a convention comes to your city, your country, that you give it a flair which is uniquely yours, but so that it still feels like Worldcon. And that you're not going to get except by experiencing it to some extent, and then also doing what fans always do, reading about it too, But you need to do some of that in order to have a sense of this is what people's expectations are. So
fair enough.
that's my suggestion.
I appreciate you coming to be with us, Deb, today.
My apologies to people. I'm sorry I have to leave, but I turn around and open up another Zoom so that I can teach. So be well, and thank you again very much for inviting me.
Thank you for being here, Deb.
Bye-bye.
Bye. See you soon.
Oh.
Technology. So let's go with this question and go back to the previous one later. What would be, being realistic, being real, being honest, what would we need to do? What would we need to change? How would we go about bringing a Worldcon to Israel? Let's start with James.
It's interesting, actually, because there were 65 Israeli fans at Dublin before we measured, before the convention began, and more may have shown up. That would be considerably more than the amount of Irish fans were at most American Worldcons in the previous years ever. We never had 65 fans at an American Worldcon from Ireland. We possibly had more than that at the British Worldcons. I'd have to check those figures. So there's obviously an interest in a Worldcon from Israeli fans. So that's for me, that's covered. And I met some Israeli fans in 2006 at LACon who were involved with ICON and convention, when it was one big convention, and other events back then, which they were lovely people and very engaged, and they were going to Worldcon. Venues and everything else is obviously something that you look at, in your wherever your country is. I suppose a more difficulty would be the current global or local political issues that exist. And then it's about sort of trying to extend hands of friendship in the correct directions and trying to engage people, because it is an international convention. Ireland has it easy in a way. We had a lot of problems in the 50s and 60s and 70s particularly. And but our science fiction fandom worked through that somehow. There wasn't really the issue, that wasn't really an issue for our fans or our con-goers per se of that era. And they were from different communities anyhow. So there is a big challenge for fans, but then I don't think it's insurmountable. If you can bring a Worldcon to Ireland, you can bring a Worldcon to Israel. But as I say, I think that the challenge will be that international connection in the region. Like, how do you have fans from other parts of the region coming to your Worldcon and engaging fully with you and writers? And we recognize that, that's easy for me to say, oh, everyone's into science fiction. But we also know that might be harder, or I would imagine it's harder in this instance, but I don't think it's insurmountable.
Vince?
Yeah, I would say that the primary things that you have to do are, simply do you have the venues, and do you have that critical mass of committed people who are going to actually run the event, are going to engage with the Worldcon community worldwide. Those two remain far and away the most important things. If you don't have both of those, then you don't have anything. Honestly, everything else can be worked out.
Fair enough.
It's really as simple as that. You can make it work. Yeah, just make sure you have a viable location and venue and hotels and all of that, and some decent transport links, and that you have a really solid team who are enthusiastic about doing it because they want to do it, not just because they feel they have to do it. Who will go out and will meet people at other Worldcons and other events, and actually it's best to do it by example, but and show up and take part and volunteer and learn, and bring your unique thing as well. What is it that a Worldcon in Israel, a Worldcon in Tel Aviv would bring? It's not just about running the same thing every year. That's one of the things about Worldcon is, yes, there's a basic structure and some elements that tend to be the same, but you bring your local your local culture, your local style to it, your local ideas, and we still introduce new stuff. So if you can do that, then that's far more important than any particular international or temporary political issue. I mean, there is nowhere in the world that doesn't have something like that. And as long as you've got the place and you've got the people, everything else can be worked out.
So what is the process for a Worldcon to be chosen to go to a certain country?
The Worldcon is chosen by the members of the Worldcon 2 years before. So there's a formal site selection process where bidders from various cities around the world put in a proposal, that they want to run the Worldcon in a particular year. And then 6 months prior to the Worldcon, 2 years before the year you want to run it, the site selection process kicks off. And then there's an administration of that, the kind of voting for that up to the Worldcon of 2 years before, where the final votes are taken. And then the winner of that vote is selected as the Worldcon. There's a lot more detail to it, of course. There are certain things you need to submit to show that you have that you have a facility, you have a committee, etc. But that's very detailed. You can see those rules on any Worldcon website. But much more important than that, than the kind of like the mechanical or the administrative, is if you want it to be a successful bid, you need to have been showing up for several years beforehand, showing your ability, your competence, your enthusiasm, your energy, your willingness to listen, as well as to have
fun. That's
it.
it. No Worldcon Israel. Ability to listen, that's too much. I'm sorry.
James, did I miss anything?
No, I think Vincent has it covered very well there. And he's actually right. He's mentored me and I would always look to his lead. And I think he's right. People and venue. And what you have and why you want, why, why do you want to run it? When you turn up with a group of fans who say, we want you to come to our country to see our history and our culture and our language and our fiction and our art. And you can then point to other parts of that, which is not just here's a local author, but also here's wonderful stuff. People love that, and fans want to enjoy and really what they want to do is they want to see a good bid. And the process, while the formal part that Vince described, the vote is 2 years before the convention. Most conventions for some time now, since about the 1970s, have followed, particularly outside of America, have followed a particular pattern, which is set out by Peter Weston. And Peter Weston chaired the 1979 Worldcon, and he announced locally 1970-71 in the UK that he wanted to run a Worldcon. And then I think it was 1974, he turned up and he basically said, we want to run a Worldcon. He turned up very strong. And they said, here we are, we want to run a Worldcon in the UK before the end of the decade. That sort of JFK space thing, And basically most Worldcons do that. They have a 5 or 6 year lead where they're telling people we would like to run it. And then they host the parties and they host tables and they do promotions, but the exact same sort of promotions that you would have for Icon or any other event in Israel,
Okay, so I would like to ask one more question on this and then bring it back to how do you handle it when it goes wrong? And thank you, by the way, for these answers. So the question is very specific. Does Worldcon make money? Does it lose money? And if it loses money, who covers the loss?
That's an interesting question. Most Worldcons aim to do a little bit more than break even. A lot of previous Worldcons give the current Worldcon some pass along funds, and then Worldcons give leftovers to some future Worldcons. Most Worldcons break even or make a small amount of money, but then they use it for local fandom things or they pass it along. So it's not a huge amount. You would be surprised if this, and somewhere between 5 and 10% maybe at best of your turnover.
And what would be your turnover?
$1 million, I suppose, $1 million.
So the local fandom could end up playing with about $100,000.
So I say that, but it probably less, probably closer to 50. But then again, I was on the committee.
Then the Finns show up at Dublin and say, we made too much money, let's buy you free beer.
Well, there you are. That's also a factor. But their beer was very expensive. So the thing is that if you look at Lungcon, which I was on the committee of, Lungcon broke even but actually they got some support from Chicago and Texas after the event to ensure they broke even. And I think there was a convention, Vincent, that did make a loss, but again, fandom assisted, if I remember correctly. So, and actually there's been a couple of other conventions which I'm not going to name, which were Worldcons, and we know that other conventions have helped them post after their convention so that they've broken even. So you are on the hook for it, and you have to do a good job with the financials, and it's very nerve-wracking. That is very nerve-wracking, actually. It's very difficult, but it's good fun. There's lots of expertise in that field. But yeah.
We know how to make it work. And the main thing to understand is that the Worldcon almost always is run as a non-profit. And therefore, in order to be sensible, you're aiming for, positive cash flow, and inevitably you don't know exactly who's maybe going to turn up on the day. So you're a little bit conservative. So you end up with a little bit of a surplus. So on average, as James said, certainly North American Worldcons will tend to make maybe a 5 to 10% surplus. And then once all the bills are paid, any surpluses that is then either passed to future Worldcons or some to local events. It is a non-profit. Nobody is paid for this in terms of the volunteer committee.
And the volunteers in the committee actually pay a membership to go, right?
That's right. Yes, we pay our own way. As I said much earlier, we're doing this for love, not money. Yeah.
But that's an important membership. Remember, Gadi. So what you will have, each convention has its own structure in its early days. So we had for Dublin and for London in 2014, we had a thing called subscribers, where you paid a larger amount of money than you would normally anyhow to go to a Worldcon. And you would get your Worldcon membership from that money. But that money was then seed money to help the bid get going. And then you have things called super friends of the bid, where you see people giving you $250 for a convention that's only costing $140 or $150 to go, but they're literally giving you their money so that you win your bid. Like, you have to think about it. You're trying to bring a Worldcon to a country or a place, and people are excited by it. So giving you a few extra euro or dollars or pounds is not a concern. The payback is huge if you get to bring this massive convention to your neighborhood. So that area, well, although there's a couple of things you should say. One, if somebody can't afford to pay, that's never been an issue. So there's always certain things with Worldcons where people can end up who don't have enough money, because it can be a lot of cash. So somebody who doesn't have a lot of money, you can figure that out. Yeah. And there's always funds and various sort of things and concessions that people can avail of. But the other thing is that you do pay your own membership, but that's some of the most crucial money that comes in.
All right. Well, I would have loved to end up on a fun anecdote, but we did promise we'll get back to this. Disaster, crisis, something hits the convention. It always does. What do you do? How do you handle it?
Well, you handle it and you prepare yourself for that. I mean, we try to plan for various contingencies that might happen, and more importantly, we try to make sure that the committees that we are organizing are, prepared for such things. So preparation is always the most important thing for things going wrong. Sometimes that can be done in fun ways. You can like gamify it. I mean, in decades past, there was a thing called a paper-based kind of tool called If I Ran the ZooCon, which Leslie Turek, one of the Boston Worldcon chairs, put together, which is basically, it's a number of kind of based on true life examples of things that go wrong and how you can deal with them. So it's kind of like a fun gamified training package. And of course, although each Worldcon is run by a separate committee, there's a lot of continuity in terms of the people. And so at Worldcons and at the SMOFCon, the small convention running event each year, they're kind of like trading war stories on, what's gone wrong, how we dealt with it, where we could anticipate it, where we couldn't. And then, because of course, the test of your ability is not just those things that you can anticipate, it's also how you deal with things that you can't anticipate. The unknown unknowns are sometimes called. And in recent years, there have been a whole bunch of those, not least that we're all living in one. And you know, building in your capacity, your contingency, your resilience as an organization, as volunteers, is the most important thing there, because you need to be able to deal with those unexpected events, whether it's to do with the Hugos, whether it's a guest dying, whether it's your, you know, to take an example this year, your hotel going bankrupt. At the same time that there's a pandemic going on, you know, it's your capacity to deal with that is a combination of your preparation for the specific, as well as your ability to be flexible and to, you know, to be resilient enough as individuals.
While you are, in my book, one of the world experts on this and on leadership in general, we do need to finish, and I do want to give James the opportunity. So apologies, but That's I do want to give James the opportunity to say his spiel for a second. So, anything quick you can add?
Yeah, I think just to be prepared to apologize when you or your team have gone astray and made a mistake, or unintentionally. Like, nobody ever sets out to do so to upset people. You know what I mean? We normally, if there's a crisis, people are upset or something's gone astray. Nobody's actually set out to begin with to do that. And hindsight, or if they could go back and turn back the clock, they often would. So it's just being prepared to say sorry and you know, move on. Remember, a problem is only a problem if you can't resolve it or overcome it.
Fair enough.
And a problem can be a problem that you bypass and say, well, that's a problem, we can't fix it, but we're going to build the road around that and continue on, and we'll, you know.
And being a rude moderator, even though you're inspiring me right now, I'll say there is a group of people in Israel who are working to bring Worldcon to Israel. Oh. And I do know that you both are also involved. So in the 10 seconds I have, I would like to put you on the spot and say, all things being equal, would you be interested in coming to a Worldcon in Israel in the future?
Yeah. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, of course. Why? It will be phenomenal.
That's enough. Yes is all I need. With that, thank you. I really appreciate you coming on today, and I really appreciate the audience listening to us. Worldcon is awesome. You should try it out.
Thanks, Gaddy.
Have a good evening.
Very much.
Have a nice evening.